as a young child growing up in the Bible Belt, did you ever think that this was going to be your life?
Never. I didn't know any Jews growing up. I prayed to have a closer relationship with Hashem, but I didn't know it was going to be like this. I never imagined or envisioned myself being a Jew. We were very active in the Baptist church. My father was a Sunday school teacher. My mother was a Sunday school teacher. My brother was very active in the youth group, and I was also active in it. We'd read the Bible, and we would hear about these stories, but we didn't have the advantage of having all the commentaries that you have in Judaism. And that's when I told my husband, okay, I want to convert. I want to be part of the Jewish people.
I'm Menachem Learfield, and this is 0%. This season, we will explore stories of Jews by choice, those who chose a Jewish way of life. What will compel somebody to join the Jewish people? A people so tiny, so insignificant in number, practically a statistical anomaly. What would compel someone to join us? And yet, these individuals have chosen a Jewish way of life. They have chosen to join our people. Often, a fresh perspective from the outside can allow us to appreciate the treasure we have in our own backyard. Through these stories, we will explore and learn the treasure that is Judaism and what led these people to choose Judaism. This month, we have the great pleasure of having Mrs. Leah Schiermeyer joining us. Leah is a lecturer and author of A Simple Twist of Faith, her memoir about her story. And if you like the story and you are moved by it, I encourage you to go out and look for her book, A Simple Twist of Faith, which you can buy on Amazon or wherever you get your books. Leah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, as a young child growing up in the Bible Belt, did you ever think that this was going to be your life?
Never. I didn't know any Jews growing up except for one family that owned a local department store. And they were not particularly religious. So I just always thought they were different than us, but I never imagined or envisioned myself being a Jew myself, as well. So
why don't we start there, I guess? So what was it like for you growing up? First of all, where are you from?
Right.
What was your upbringing like?
Okay. So I grew up in a small town in Midwestern Oklahoma. It's called Weatherford, Oklahoma. I grew up in a Baptist church. We were very active in the Baptist church. My father was a Sunday school teacher. My mother was a Sunday school teacher. My brother was very active in the youth group, and I was also active in it. And the church taught a lot of good things about a relationship with God. They taught morals. They taught about what was important to have a relationship with God. But one of their core teachings was important to a relationship with Jesus. In fact, it was taught that if you did not have a relationship with Jesus, if you not prayed to invite him into your heart, that when you died, you would burn in hell forever and ever and ever. So this was a very scary, haunting thought for me, and it stayed on my inner core for a very long time.
That's a lot of pressure for a child.
Yes, it is. And I remember lying in bed at night thinking, I hope I don't die tonight, because I'm not exactly sure I prayed the prayer just the way I was supposed to pray. And if I didn't pray it right, then I could perhaps tonight die and burn in hell forever. And it was very scary because there were many sermons taught about if you didn't pray the prayer correctly, if you didn't do it correctly, then you would burn in hell forever.
Did you ever express those concerns or fears to your parents or the minister or?
No, it was just a given that you were supposed to pray that prayer and then you were, quote, saved. So you didn't want anyone to know that maybe you had concerns that maybe you weren't really saved. But it was a scary thought to think that maybe I didn't pray the prayer correctly, because I didn't always feel, quote, saved. I didn't always feel like I had a relationship with Jesus, but at the same time, this is what the church taught. So this is what I tried to do. I prayed that prayer many times because I thought, well, maybe the first time I didn't pray it correctly, so I'll pray it again and again and again and again.
You just keep on going.
Yeah. Right.
And then what changed? At what point did you decide that that was not really the life you wanted to live?
Well, it was a long process. It wasn't an overnight thing. So it's sort of a long story, but basically...
We have time.
Okay. So what happened was that I grew up in the church, and after I went to junior high and high school and college and graduated and took a job with a local 3M company, Then after a few years, I thought if I have any chance of getting married, I'm probably going to have to move to a bigger city than Weatherford, Oklahoma. So I ended up going to Oklahoma City, and that's where I met my husband. Then after we'd married, actually about 10 years, I came to a point in time in my life when I said, it's time for a reevaluation of what's in my life, because I feel like I had a good life. I was not depressed. I was married. I had 3 beautiful children at the time, and I felt like life was very good. My husband had a good job, but I felt like that there must be something more there than what I'm accessing to have a relationship with the Almighty. I felt like I'd done everything I knew to do to be a good Christian. I prayed every day. I read my Bible. We went to church regularly. Everything they taught us to do, I had done. And yet I thought there must be something deeper there. I just don't know what it is. And so one night before I went to sleep, I prayed and I said, God, I really want to know you. No matter what the cost, please lead me to a deeper relationship with you. And that's when things began to change.
Careful what you wish for.
That's right. And I remember when I prayed, saying, no matter what the cost, I remember thinking, do I really mean that? Oh, okay.
Famous last words.
Yes. So then that's when a whole series of events began to unfold.
So a big turning point was when your husband went away for a work conference, right?
I had prayed that prayer, and it wasn't long after that my husband was sent on a work conference back to San Antonio. We used to live there, and he was sent with a former neighbor of ours, Ravain Rossio. Ravain had just, at the time we knew them in San Antonio, he was not particularly religious, but he had become a Baal Tshuva. And when they went on this trip, he had just been to a seminar by Rabbi Tobias Singer. Rabbi Tobias Singer is an outreach rabbi, and he had given a seminar on why Jews don't believe in Jesus and why they don't accept him as Messiah. So on this trip, Ravain began to ask my husband a lot of questions about things that Christians believe. And he asked questions that were brought up from the seminar. So he asked my husband, why do Christians believe this and why do they believe that? Now, my husband was a very learned man. He studied the Bible intensely. He had a huge library. If you would ask him, where is this in the Bible? He can tell you off the top of his head. He had the books memorized. And yet he came back and he said, Ravain had some really good questions. He said, I don't ever remember hearing those questions before. And I said, I just ignore them. I'm sure that Jews have some reason why some way to explain away why they don't believe in Jesus. He said, no, these are really good questions. They deserve an answer. And then it was from there that Ravain asked him if he'd be willing to look at Rabbi Singer's workbook and his tape set. That was very upsetting to me because I thought it's kind of like if someone came to you and they said, well, I want you to listen to this workbook about Christianity and I want you to listen to it. You don't want your wife to be listening to that. And I didn't want my husband to listen to that. And I was very upset. But he listened to it and he was blown away by it. And he said, because all along in Christianity, he said he always believed what was taught, but there was always some nagging questions in the back of his mind. When he had gone to a pastor to ask that pastor about those questions, he said, well, Bob, I have some questions too. But he said, just make yourself a faith pit. And whenever you have those questions, just put them in a faith pit. And then one by one, hopefully through life, you'll be able to take those out and you'll be able to resolve them and it'll be fine. So my husband said that's what he'd done. But when he listened to Rabbi's tape set, he said, all of a sudden, all those questions, all the loose ends began to come together and all the dots began to connect. And he realized he'd had a problem because there was a problem. And he said what Rabbi Singer presented made more sense to him than what any Christian pastor had ever done to represent Christianity, that Rabbi Singer had actually represented very accurately.
Meaning Rabbi Singer's understanding of Christianity.
Right. When he explained it, he said it was very accurate. So he said after he listened to the tape set, he was like, I've had a problem because there's a problem. When he told me that, I was very upset. And
why are you rocking the boat?
Right. And I kept thinking, well, it's probably just because he doesn't have as much faith as I do. And he doesn't understand as much as I do. So initially, I just began to pray for him and think, well, maybe things will get better. And I kept saying, let's go talk to this pastor. Let's go do this. Let's read these books. Let's do this. But the bottom line was that we never really got the answers that we wanted.
Did you go to the pastors and ask them the questions?
It was very embarrassing because in the church, you're not supposed to ask questions. To me, it's like the analogy of the emperor's new clothes. If you're familiar with that story, to me, it was kind of like that. Everyone said, no one would admit that there was a problem. No one would say that these are concerns that we should have. My husband went to the pastor and he hadn't gotten too much in the discussion until the pastor just said, Bob, I just know that what I believe is true and that's good enough for me. That didn't really give us any answers. We kept searching, we kept asking. Eventually, we were asked to leave the church. It was a very painful thing.
Because of the questions.
Yes. Well, my husband was also a Sunday school teacher. Everyone really liked him. In fact, the ironic thing was when we first went to the church there, everyone loved him as a Sunday school teacher. They even came to him and said, "You are so learned. Would you consider teaching classes during the week as well? Because we think we can learn so much from you." But when he began to present some of the questions we were having, everyone became very uncomfortable. And that's when they said that we needed to leave.
Wow. That must have felt very isolating.
Yes, it did. It really did. I tell the story in my book, and I tell the story when I speak to people how dramatic it was, because we thought that some of the representatives of the church were coming to our house at night just to discuss the questions we had. They didn't have to agree with us. They didn't have to have answers. We just wanted them to be our friends. We just wanted them to reach out to us and acknowledge that there were some issues there that need to be addressed. So I remember it was in December of 1995. They came to our house, and I was so excited they were coming. And I tried to set the whole scene where we had the Christmas tree with the twinkling lights, and I had the spiced tea, and I had the brownies cooking. And they come in the house, and they sit down, and these men look like they come to pay a shiva call. And they come in the house, and they sit down, and I'm like, I can already tell that things are not going to go the way I'd hoped they would. And I said, "Would anyone like some coffee?" And they're like, "No." "And how about some brownies?" "No." And they sit down, and I'm standing in the kitchen just watching. I don't want to be at the table. And they asked my husband, "Bob, so who do you believe Jesus is?" And at the time, we were still struggling with so many things. They said, "Well, he's my Lord and the Savior." And they said, "Well, then what do you think of the issue of Trinity?" Trinity is where they teach that God is three like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost or whatever. And he said, "Well, I think that's idolatry." And he began to explain that. And they're like, "Bob, with a belief like that, what are you doing being a member of our church?" And I was standing in the kitchen, I was crying, I came over and I said, "Can I just say one thing?" I said, "If everything you had ever believed in was being called into question, and you were told that you were going to burn and die in hell forever and ever, if you didn't believe like that, wouldn't you want someone to talk to you? Wouldn't you want someone to help you?" And I remember the spokesman for the group said, "Marcella, the women in the church, they really like you. They really do." He said, "I'm really sorry for this." And with that, they got up and left. And I remember thinking, how am I going to tell my parents? This is my whole life. This is my whole identity. It's like, how am I going to tell my parents? How are we going to teach our kids? They were in private Christian schools. What are they going to do when they go to school? How are we going to keep this a secret? Who are going to be my friends? It was very painful. And it's interesting, though, because that was in December 1995. Do you know what age Denver was founded?
Wow.
December 1995.
So there's a Jewish concept that God always provides the refuah, the healing,
Correct.
the solution before the machla, before the illness.
Right.
Which is quite amazing that you can
look back now
and see that.
Yeah. That's part of the reason why I really enjoyed writing my story, was because I could look back and say, "Oh, wow, I didn't see that then." There's so many little pieces of the puzzle that fit together in the rearview mirror, but you can't see it when it's in front of you.
Almost like the Megillah story. That's what I always think of.
Right. I love that story. It was like, wow, because Hashem really is there. When that happened that evening, there was one man that stayed behind. His name was Steve. I was good friends with his wife. And when he heard about the meeting, he said, "Oh, well, I'll come. Maybe I can be a mediator." Because he wasn't really invited to the meeting, but he was part of our church and he knew about the meeting. And then when he showed up, everyone was like, "What are you doing here?" Well, he stayed behind after the other men left. And I remember I was sitting over on the couch. I was crying. He said, "Well, Marcella, it's not like it's the end of the world." And maybe to him it wasn't, but to me it was, because I couldn't see in front of me. This is my whole identity. This is what we based our whole life upon. This is why I married my husband. This is how we raised our kids. This is my whole family. My grandfather was a Baptist minister. And I thought, I'm going to have to tell my parents that we're not a part of the church anymore. It was very difficult.
How did it go when you told your parents?
Not good. Initially, I wasn't going to tell them. I would always try to evade the issue, but they would usually call us every Sunday and they would ask us how church went, and I'd always just kind of avoid the issue. And finally, there was one day when I was so emotional that I had to tell them. And initially, they said they would get us help and that there was a pastor there in their community that could look at some of the questions Bob had asked. He'd written a book. They said he'll look at the book and he'll read it and he'll be able to help you, and we'll get you the help we need. many weeks went by, and the subject wasn't brought up again when I spoke to my parents. And I kept thinking, well, did the pastor look at it? Did he discuss it with them? And nothing was said. And finally, one evening, I brought it up with my mother, and she got really quiet. She said, well, Marcella, the pastor just said this was written by a very angry man, and he can't respond to someone who's very angry like that. And I remember crying and saying, Mom, we have these questions. And she said, well, I can't see what your questions are. She said, I don't understand what they were. And I said, well, could we get the book and could we look at it then over the phone? And she said, no, I don't think we need to do that. And we just went back and forth, and I was crying. I said, Mom, someone needs to help us. Someone needs to answer these questions. Or I can't go on as a Christian unless I have answers to these questions. And then about that time, my father got home from church, and she said, Marcel, I need to go. And then it was very quiet, and they wouldn't talk to us. And it was very awkward.
Wow, that must have been really painful.
It was very painful. In fact, one of the things I write about in my book is how that I went through a real period of depression. I cried a lot, and I didn't want my husband to always see me crying, my kids to always see me crying. There were many issues that were raised at their school because they're in a private Christian school, and they were having these productions. They're like, why should we go? Why do we have to be in the production? And there were a lot of problems there. I would go in the bathroom and I would pray and I would tell God, I just want to die. I know that was the wrong thing to do now, but at the time, I felt I couldn't handle it. I thought, I don't know how I'm going to go on with my life, and I don't know what I believe. I don't know what direction we're taking. I don't feel like I have a relationship with anyone now. I feel like I've lost everything. I feel like I've lost my friends. I've lost my parents. I've lost my family. My brother, I have one older brother. He cut off total communication with me. He told me that I was no longer his sister. It was just very, very painful. So I remember thinking, I don't know where to go from here. I thought my husband was strong, and he was so excited to discover that now all the things made sense and he could learn about Judaism. That was so exciting to him. For me, it wasn't so exciting because I wanted to stay where I was. I wanted to somehow have someone resolve those questions and someone to say, oh, here's where everything was misrepresented, and now you can go back to believing the way you believed. But it wasn't like that.
You were just looking for the answers.
Right.
And you were hoping that the answers would all confirm.
Right. And that everything
you taught were taught. And
right. And that things had just been misrepresented. We went through this difficult time. And then after about 6 months after leaving the church, I think it's about 6 months, a year, we were transferred to Oklahoma City. That's where I'm from, Oklahoma. And my parents are only about an hour's drive away. And I'd always thought that would be so great to go back to Oklahoma and be near my parents. But it wasn't like that at all. It was very, very traumatic. We went back there, and one of the questions that arose was, what school are our kids going to go to? They couldn't go to a Christian school anymore. They possibly could go to a secular school, but when they went, they hated it. They said they didn't like it, and it left a much to be desired. So they begged me to homeschool. And this was something my parents had always been adamantly opposed to, but I agreed to do it because we were at a point in time in our family, in our lives, where we just needed that closeness and we needed to be able to learn together. I agreed to do it. But again, this is something I tried to keep secret from my parents because I knew when they found out they weren't going to be happy about that. They already thought their daughter had gone off the deep end and now she was homeschooling. What else could she be doing? Oh, we also got rid of our TV. That was, everything was just really, they were really praying for their daughter. But eventually I had to tell them that things were very, very tense between my parents. But again, I began to homeschool, and things were we just felt like we were seeking direction. We were seeking answers. And then about halfway through that school year, I had to go back to the doctor again. This time I had some problems, bladder problems, but this time they diagnosed me with cancer, and it was bladder cancer. Then I began to think, well, they told me that this was such an unusual case because most people who have bladder cancer are men, not women. If they do have it, they usually have it when they're in their 50s or 60s. I was in my late 30s. They said that it's usually, if women do get it, it's usually because they're heavy smokers or been exposed to harsh chemicals. I'd never smoked, and I grew up on a farm. They couldn't understand why I had bladder cancer. But then I kept thinking, well, I'm prayed to die in the bathroom. And now here I have this diagnosis. I was told that I might have 3 years to live. So I went through chemo. And then not long after that, I was having some issues. I went to the doctor and I was pregnant. So it was pretty traumatic.
It sounds like an emotional roller coaster.
It was. Yeah.
And this is with the twins?
Yes, it was.
Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was a high-risk pregnancy. We wanted to have more children, but I thought if I have cancer and I don't know if I'm even going to live, I certainly don't want to get pregnant again. And I was pregnant. I was a high-risk pregnancy, but this time I was 40 years old. So it was pretty traumatic. But, thank God Hashem still took care of us. I get really emotional because I think about how hard I prayed that they would be healthy because I was so scared. And now both those twins are married. They have beautiful
family.
Jewish children. My son just came to visit me with their daughter and his wife. And it's just, I see how Hashem has really, really. At the time, I couldn't see that. I could see what's going on. I prayed to have a closer relationship with Hashem, but I didn't know it was going to be like this.
Wow.
But again, Hashem really, really blessed us.
And you've seen it. And you acknowledge it. I mean, that's really, I think, the remarkable part of that is so many of us have these blessings in our lives, and often the challenges are the only things that stick out. But to be able to see both sides of that equation is really remarkable.
Right. Again, when they were first born, though, we weren't going to church.
You had no support system, no community.
Right.
So a time that's usually very joyous.
Right.
Without that support system is really challenging, not to mention
it is.
Coming off cancer and having twins.
Right. I remember that I went to some kind of assembly or something at the school that my boys had. They were homeschooled that first year. The second year, I couldn't homeschool them. So we found a different school that we liked and we were comfortable with. And I gone to some kind of assembly there. And when the assembly was over, there was this one woman who came down and she said hello to me. I guess maybe her kids were in my son's class. So she came over, she goes, "Oh, so good to see you." And somehow in the conversation, it came up where we went to church. And she said, "Well, where do you go to church at?" I just burst into tears. She said, "Oh, of course, I'm so sorry. And then she probably got more information than she ever wanted to hear, but we just wanted someone to care. We just wanted someone to talk to us. We wanted someone to help us.
So when did all that change?
Again, it was not overnight. After we had lived in Oklahoma City for about a year and a half, my husband was transferred again to Colorado Springs. We moved to Colorado Springs, and initially it was nice because no one knew our background. No one was going to ask us where we went to church, and most of our neighbors didn't go to church. I always thought that would be a horrible thing. Your neighbors don't go to church. Maybe they don't believe in God, but it was kind of nice because no one asked us, and we didn't feel like we were under scrutiny. But we moved there, and we had heard that there was some Jewish community in Denver. We weren't far away, being in Colorado Springs. We tried to reach out to someone in Denver. I think it was Rabbi Tversky.
Okay.
Tversky. But then we found out that he was even no longer there. My husband would leave messages. He probably didn't know who we were. And we weren't making too much headway. We continued to learn the Parsha with our children, and we tried to learn as much as we could, but it's so difficult when you're not in a community. We were like people just on the island by ourselves trying to teach ourselves, and we had a Chumash, and that's about all we had. And we would try to read the Parsha of the week.
At that point, did you know or think that you were heading towards conversion to Judaism, or you just knew that Christianity was not for you?
We just knew that Christianity
you were
was not
just
for us.
Exploring.
Correct. We felt like that the Torah was true. I'd accepted that, and I accepted the fact that Christianity was not true, that there were problems there, and I could no longer believe that. I could no longer embrace that. But going towards conversion was just such a dramatic change that I couldn't even entertain the idea of doing that. I think possibly my husband could, but I couldn't. I wanted to learn. I still wanted to have a connection with the Almighty. I still wanted to be able to pray and to have that relationship, but I didn't know where we were going to go from there. We continued to learn with our children. Every Chabus, we would sit down with them and we would try to read the Parsha with them. It's funny because their friends would ring the doorbell and they'd be like, "Can Robbie come out and play? What are you guys doing in there? Wow, it's not yet." Just a minute. So we didn't do that much other than that we would read the Parsha with them. We would reward them if they knew the answer to the questions we asked them. That was done as far as we went. Then there was one day that Rabbi Eisenman from Baltimore called my husband. It's a long story how we knew him, but my husband had read some of his books, art school books, and he really liked them. He had mentioned to another rabbi that he really liked those books. And the rabbi said, this is a rabbi in Dayton. He said, well, why don't you just call him? And my husband was like, I can just call him. I can just call him up. And he said, sure. So he called up Rabbi Eisenman and he talked to him about the book. And they had a lot of discussion about some of the points that he made in the book. And he sort of took us under his wing. And he said, if there's anything I can do for you, let me know. If you have questions, call me. So he called us one evening when we were living in Colorado Springs. We'd lived there probably 6 months to a year. And he asked us how we were doing. And my husband said, well, we're not doing that great. He said, we try to make connections with people in Denver. We don't know who to make connections with. And we're just trying to study on our own. Rabbi Eisenman said he had a grandson that was Yeshiva Torah Khan. He said, I'm going to call the principal there. I think he called Rabbi Feldheim and said that I'm going to ask him to meet with you and to help you. And that's what he did. We set up an appointment to go to Denver to the yeshiva and meet with Rabbi Feldheim. I was so excited because we had someone to talk to and they weren't very far away. We made an appointment to go on a Sunday. We loaded up all the kids in our van and we drive down to Denver to the yeshiva and we meet with Rabbi Feldheim. I had this whole list of questions I wanted to ask him. At the time, I thought these were the most urgent questions I had to ask. Things like, Rabbi Feldheim, we don't celebrate Christmas anymore, but what do we do when someone says Merry Christmas? And all the questions I asked, he had like those were the most insightful questions he'd ever heard. He didn't laugh at them. He didn't make light of them. He was very patient with us and he talked to us and he was very understanding. He told us about a shul that was in Denver. At the time, I think it was called Chabus Israel.
So was that what we now call a stemmer?
Yes, it was. Rabbi Feldheim said that it would be closer for us from Colorado Springs. He said that Rabbi Meyer gave classes several nights during the week. He said it might be something that we would want to consider. We got back from Denver and my husband told me the next week that he wanted to go and check out that shul that Rabbi Feldheim had suggested. He went there. He went to a Wednesday Parsha class. He came home and he really liked it. And he said, I think you'd really like it. He said, the people there are really nice. And they invited me for dinner. And because he would go there, I don't know if you remember the Herskovicius, but he would go there. And then the Herskovicius would invite him for dinner and he would stay over for a Wednesday night class. And he really, really enjoyed it. Eventually, I said that I would go. And my first exposure to Denver was a class I gave on a Sunday evening. Some rabbi came, I think, from Las Vegas, and he gave a class on marriage. So we went to the class, and at that time, they didn't have any form of childcare. So we took all our kids, and we paid our older kids to babysit our younger kids in one of the back rooms, and we went to the class. I was a little bit skeptical when I first went there because, again, this was all different for me. I'd never been to a shul before. Actually, I'd been one time before, but it was with some friends in Dallas. This was a shul, though, that was in Denver that we might consider going to. Rabbi Meyer had said normally he doesn't welcome potential converts into shul. They just had this whole fiasco in the community. So he didn't necessarily encourage people, but he said if Rabbi Eisenman recommended us, then we could come. We went to the class and I liked it. I enjoyed it. I had a lot of questions because things were different. Things were foreign to me. I went there. And then after that, I decided that I would go on a Shabbos morning. Again, this was a whole experience because we would get up early and we would drive to Denver for the services. I didn't know anything. I didn't know the language. I didn't know the order of the service. Everything was so different than the way it was when I grew up in the church. I felt so
out of place.
Yes. And on top of that, I had my twins and they were very young at the time. They were either 1 or 1.5 and there was no childcare. And so I tried to bring them to service and they would both want to sit on my lap and they both start crying and then I'd have to get up and leave. And it was just a whole experience.
Not a very pleasant experience.
Right. But the people there were very nice. I liked that. Eventually, though, after a few weeks, I told my husband, I just want to stay home. You can go if you want to go, but I can't do that. I'm not getting anything out of it. I don't understand what's going on. I feel very uncomfortable. There's no childcare. It's just too difficult for me. Eventually, my husband stayed home with me, too, and we would just do the learning with our kids on Shabbos morning. That was the best thing we could do. But then eventually, my husband was retiring from the Air Force. A decision had to be made where we were going to live at. And I said, well, let's just stay here in Colorado Springs. That would not rock the boat so much. He could take a job locally. We could continue to teach our children. We could just kind of stay where we were. And when there were special events in Denver, then we would go to them. There was one night that Lori Platnick was going to be speaking. I think she was taking a women's mission to Israel, so she was speaking to the women there. My husband told me that I should probably go, and I said, okay, I'll go. I knew who Lori Platnick was because we had her book, Friday Night and Beyond, and I really enjoyed it. So I said, okay, I'll go listen to her. I went, and I was really inspired by what she had to say. And when we were driving back from Denver that night, I said to my husband, I said, I think if I had someone like Lori to teach me, I think it would really help me a lot. Turns out that's what happened. But we got back to Colorado Springs. And after thinking about our whole decision as to what to do after retirement, I thought, if we do this, if we stay in Colorado Springs, we'll be saying our whole lives, we're thinking about conversion. We are. And maybe we would tell part of our story how we left the church, but that's where it would end. Nothing else would ever happen. The rabbis had told us that if we learned about Judaism and conversion was not for us, that was okay, that we did not have to continue after that. There was nothing unacceptable about that. Eventually, I told my husband I wanted to move. I felt like if we moved to Denver, that would be the less traumatic thing for our children because their friends were still in Colorado Springs. They could still visit them. They could still see them. We weren't moving out of the country. We weren't many states away. We were just moving to Denver. That's what we ended up doing. And just within a month after we moved to Denver, the Platnicks came for a Shabbat. They really made a big impression. Everyone was very...
Oh, when you met Lori for the first time, she didn't live here?
Correct.
Oh, my. Okay.
Yes. I had her book.
She was just a visiting...
Right.
Like scholar.
Right.
Okay.
Right. This is funny. This is a side note. I was so excited to hear her because I had her book and it meant a lot to me. And I had learned some from it about Chabus. She was going to be speaking that day. And I went to the shul that morning. I got there early. And someone thought that I was Lori Platnick because I was dressed up and whatever in pink. And they thought, oh, that must be Lori. I appreciated that compliment. But anyway, but at the end of the service that night, I stayed for hot dog. We stayed for the whole thing. And I said to her, thank you so much for coming. And she said, oh, my pleasure. She said, see you soon. And I thought, what does she mean by that? See you soon. Well, it was that they had been invited to be on staff at Aish. So it wasn't long after that. It wasn't just a couple months after we had moved to Denver that they moved there. So we were both new. And she had a daughter, Malki, who was the same age as the twins, as Esty and Benjamin. They became best friends. And then Rabbi Meyer told me if I was going to live in the community, consider conversion, I needed someone to learn with. I wasn't sure who, and I was a little bit scared to ask for Lori because I thought, she's such whatever. But I asked,
celebrity.
Right. But I asked Rabbi Meyer if I could learn with her. And he said, yes, I'm not sure she'll have time, but you can ask her. And I asked her, and she said, sure, that she would. She said that learning partners are sort of like a marriage that you have to click. But she said, fortunately, we clicked and we began to learn together. That was a huge turning point for me because Lori had not grown up religious and she could relate to a lot of things I was going through. And she would just come every Tuesday and Thursday to my kitchen table and we would sit down and learn. And she would be patient while I cried and explain to her all that I was going through and all the struggles I was having, all the challenges I was having, and also the things that were encouraging to me that I was learning. We began to learn many different things. We learned about Shabbos. One of the most meaningful things to me was that she would invite us to her house for Shabbos. And I began to see what a real Shabbos meal was like, what a real Shabbos table was like. That was so special to me. And I really, really enjoyed it. And not only that, but it didn't hurt that her daughter was best friends with. It was always cute because my son used to say, when I grow up, I'm going to marry Malki. Well, he didn't marry that Malki, but he did marry a Malki.
See, I think that's the theme of this story is careful what you say.
That's right. But anyway, that was a real turning point because I really enjoyed it. That was one thing that really helped. Another thing was just going to the classes every week because in the church, we'd read the Bible and we would hear about these stories, but we didn't have the advantage of having all the commentaries that you have in Judaism. And I would hear all like behind the scenes stories of what happened. It's like, wow, this is so fascinating. I really would think about my parents, and I think if they could get over the stigma of Judaism, they would have loved learning about these things, of all the things in the background, the things I didn't know before. And I loved it, and I look forward to it every week. That was kind of where I began to see that maybe this is something that I could embrace, that I would like. One of the things that happened, though, was I remember there was one week when we hadn't been going there very long, and Lori had given her class, and then all the women were filing out of the classroom. They were going to go downstairs for Kiddush, and she stopped me. She said, she said something about, I heard that you want your older son to be more involved, or you want him to learn more about Judaism. And she said, so if you want to do that, then you should send him on that men's mission that's coming up. And I just burst into tears, and she goes, come on, what's happening? Some things I really love about Judaism. Some things are so intimidating to me. I said, I look into the shul and I see them and they're going like this. And I said, I don't know what that's all about. And I said, I don't understand the language and I really want to learn, but they're standing up and they're sitting down and I can't concentrate because I'm so concerned about whether I'm supposed to be sitting or standing and if what everybody else is doing. And I feel so intimidated by that. But I said, I love learning Torah. I love learning the Parsha class. I love those things. I love the people here. There's just this disconnect. And she sat down with me and she told me about this one friend she had in seminary. And she said she did everything at once. And she said she was doing everything within just a few short weeks. And she burned out. She said, you can't do that. You have to go slowly and you have to learn things. And she said, it's all a process. And that's also when she told me that she would learn more with me. Again, that was another turning point. So I did learn with her, but then obviously there were big humps to get over. And one of them was Passover, because when I started learning about that, she said, well, don't make a big deal about that first year. She said, just put away your bread and put away things that might be chametz and just try to do the best you can. I thought, we can do that. It didn't quite work out like that. I thought, it's only for 8 days. We'll just have like fresh fruits and vegetables for 8 days. Well, my kids kept saying, I'm hungry. What is there to eat? And it's like, just have an apple. But it was a very challenging time. And I remember thinking, there's no way that I can do this. And I told her afterwards, I said, I think this was a sign that I wasn't meant to be Jewish. And she said, no, it's just how much you want it. So we still continued to learn. And I would just, there are so many things to learn, so many things to embrace, but it was just nice to have her there to kind of guide me and to help me. And after about a year or two, she said, well, when do you think you might be ready for conversion? And I'm like, no, not yet. Because I was so scared that we might go to conversion and then I really am Jewish. What if I have this meltdown and I say, I don't want to do this. I'm tired of doing this. I can't do this. I can't take this. I don't want that to happen. I want to make sure that I'm really ready. And there was something very comfortable about not being Jewish because I could have the benefits of learning about Torah and going to classes and learning about Shabbat, but technically I wasn't obligated to do anything. I could turn lights on and off. I could put makeup on Shabbat. I could break my fast. It was great. I had both worlds. The only problem was that I wasn't really Jewish and I really couldn't access that intimate relationship with the Almighty like a Jew can. I continued to learn, and then in 2004, it was right before Pesach, my husband got a call from the hospital. And the time was like, this is awful, this is terrible, because they called and they said there had been an incident that happened in the hospital. And they said that because of this, we're going to put you on investigative leave. And I'm not at liberty to talk about, although my husband said, oh, you can talk about it now, it's fine. But anyway, there were 20 people in the room to say that what he did was appropriate. But yet this drunk grandmother had filed a complaint. And they said because of that, she'd seen his yarmulke. She thought he was Jewish. She said she was really upset. So they put him on investigative leave. All of Pesach, that's all my husband could think about. He kept saying, how could they, whatever. And then I think it was either the last day of Pesach or the next to last day, they called him in and they released him from his job. Then we had to make a decision what to do.
Once again.
Right. And again, it seemed like, oh, this is awful. This is terrible. He's lost his job. What are we going to do for income? How are we going to pay our bills? I'm a stay-at-home mom. And then he got a call from someone who knew that he was unemployed back in Ohio, where he used to work. And they offered him a job that was pretty much double the salary of what he was making in Denver. And we thought, and we looked online to see where we might live because we were familiar with the area and they had beautiful houses with big backyards. And we thought that might be a possibility. Consider moving back there. We liked Ohio and it would be a comfortable lifestyle. We thought if we end up not going through conversion, we still can learn. And our kids love to play sports. They're really good at that. I thought we can go back to having them play their sports games and we can go back to
You're saying on Saturdays.
Right, on Saturdays. And then also, we wouldn't have to keep kosher. There's plenty of restaurants to go to, which we missed.
I bet.
And we could go back to that lifestyle. And then it was really a time of thinking about what's most important. It was almost like a time of reevaluation again and saying, what do we want to do? We could go back, live a comfortable lifestyle. Our kids would be happy playing sports. We could eat all the non-kosher food we wanted to. And then I just kept thinking, is that really what's the most important thing in my life? At the end of days, do I want to say to myself, oh, I got so much pleasure out of all that non-kosher food. I got so much pleasure out of living in a big house. Is that what's going to bring me so much fulfillment and so much joy? Is just those material things? Or is it that intimate relationship with God that I prayed for so deeply years earlier? And I realized those things are nice, but it's not what's most important in life. And that's when I told my husband, okay, I want to convert. I want to be part of the Jewish people. And I knew it would be easy. I knew there would be challenges, but it's what I really, really wanted. And that's what my husband had been wanting for a long time. So I told Lori, I said, we're ready for conversion. She's like, oh, finally. and they made arrangements for Rabbi Greenblatt from Memphis to do the conversion. And in December 2004, my husband and I went through conversion. My twins also went through conversion. And then my son, Stephen, or now Mordecai, went through conversion the following year. So, yeah. There was a little glitch. My son, Stephen, would have gone through conversion when we did, but when Rabbi Greenblatt found out that he wasn't planning on attending a Jewish day school, he asked Rabbi Meyer, why are you asking me to convert this boy who's not going to yeshiva? And so Mordecai had to make sure that that's really what he wanted to do and that he was willing to commit himself. And once he committed to that, then he went to conversion the following year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Has quite a story.
Well, I feel like I like to share because I feel like Hashem has blessed me so much. Everyone has a story. Everyone has great stories, but I appreciate that you let me share my story. I'd like to share just one little story at the end. When we first left the church, I feel like I'd lost everything. I felt like I'd lost a relationship with my family. I felt like that I didn't know how to teach my children. Everything was so up in the air. I felt like I'd lost all my friends. Then a couple of years ago, Mordecai and Schier had a baby boy on Chabus, which meant that the bris would need to be on Chabus and the whole simcha would be on Chabus. And we were trying to decide what to do because all the shuls were already booked. And so they were going to have the whole celebration at their house. And because also we couldn't walk that far to shul, my daughter-in-law just had a baby. So they scheduled the bris and they scheduled the whole simcha at their house. That Shabbos day after the bris, I looked around the table and I was so overcome with emotion because I looked around and there was Mordecai and Schier with their Jewish children, but also Mordecai's Rebbe came and all my Jewish children were there and their spouses and their children and the in-laws, the Chatan were all there. And it wasn't such an easy thing for them to be there because it was pouring rain that day. And some of them had to walk probably half an hour, 40 minutes, but they walked to the house to celebrate with us the bris of my wives. And I was just so overcome with emotion to look around and say, look what Hashem has blessed us with. And I thought, everyone's like, what's wrong with Mom? She's fine. That's right. It's like, it's okay. But I just felt so blessed that Hashem has done that for us. We're very blessed.
There's a piece of artwork you have in your dining room. You know what I'm talking about?
Which one?
The needlepoint?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Can you share with us?
Yes.
The significance of that?
Right. There's a needlepoint piece of art in our dining room that says, I think it's kind of written in King James Version, but it says, it's the excerpt from Ruth, and it says, wherever thou goest, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. That was given to us as a wedding gift back in 1984. I had a friend who wanted to give us a gift, and she knew that particular verse was on our cake. When we got married, there's a cake for the bride and there's a cake for the groom. And so the bride's cake is a big white like 5-tier cake. But then the caterer said that they also want to have a groom's cake, and that's a smaller cake, but it can be whatever flavor you want. It can be decorated however you want. And she asked me, how do you want to decorate it? And I said, there's this verse in Ruth that I think is so beautiful. Would you just put that on the cake? And that's what she put on top of the cake. And my friend knew that that's what was on the cake. So that's the needlepoint that she did, and that's the gift she gave us. And we didn't realize at the time how prophetic that would be.
Wow. Before I let you go,
Okay.
is there something specific that you can point to that drew you to Judaism? An aspect or a part of Judaism that you feel like really pulled at you and resonated with you?
Chabus.
Chabus?
Mm-hmm. Especially experience it with someone who's really Jewish. We tried to do it on our own. It's a whole different story. But when we were able to celebrate Shabbos with other people and see how beautiful it was, just the whole magic of Shabbos was what drew me in. One of the things I really liked was at the planning table when they talk about Hashgacha Pratis and seeing God's hand in your life. And anyone who had a Hashgacha Pratis story for that week would get extra chocolate chips. So all week long, I'm looking for Hashgacha Pratis stories. And it was so amazing to hear other people's stories as well, because it sort of gave me a mindset to realize that Hashem is involved in every detail of our life, even when we can't see him, even when we don't feel it. He's there.
If we're willing to see it.
Yes. And that was the turning point for me, because I thought, wow, whether I'm Jewish or I'm not Jewish, Hashem cares about me and he's running the world. But to have the privilege of having that special relationship with him as a Jew is so, it's indescribable that Hashem will love us that much and he wants that intimate relationship with us. And it was really Shabbos. Even now, I look forward to Shabbos so much. That's such an integral part of the whole experience. I remember when we first met Rabbi Feldheim, he said, we should have you for Shabbos. And I remember thinking, well, what's so special about Shabbos? Why do we have to go for Shabbos? I don't want to go with all the kids, and the kids will wake up in the night and they'll be so uncomfortable. Now I see, because there is something very magical about Shabbos, and that was what drew me in.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you all for listening. And if you enjoyed this, I would say, please go out and buy Mrs. Schiermeyer's book, A Simple Twist of Faith. You can buy it wherever you get your books, right? Amazon or wherever.
Right.
And make sure you subscribe, leave us a 5-star review so others can find the podcast as well. And we hope to catch you back here at the end of next month. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And be well.
Thank you.